Hello gamers and welcome back. I'm Rob, of course, or Warshack if you want to call me by my in-game name. And very similar to our top 5 budget-based aggro decks, we are now going over the top 5 budget-based control decks, for the Knights of the Frozen Throne expansion. Just like the aggro decks, these decks contain no epic cards, no legendary cards, and no cards from any of the adventure modes. They only contain, your basic, your rares, and your classic set. Which is actually pretty good because when building these decks, you're actually getting down some stepping stones that you need basically for all decks under the kind of archetype. So if we look at Warrior, Shield Block is always a card that we're going to want in Warrior. There's tons more of examples that I should probably use, but that's the first one that popped in my head. But either or, don't think you're actually crafting these cards and it's only going to work in this one particular deck. You're crafting these cards and it's going to work in a variety of different decks, which is kind of like the really good point that you can take away from this. So you're actually not hurting yourself in the long term. You're actually building up quite a collection for yourself without you even knowing it. So the first deck that we're actually going to be going over, if my thing would work real quick, here we are. We are going over the Cthun Warrior. Keep in mind that Cthun is a legendary card, but he's actually a free legendary card you get with your first pack of the Old Gods. So whenever you decide to pay 100 gold within the game for an Old Gods pack, it'll actually present you with Cthun in your first pack, again, for free. You actually don't have to craft him, which is why this shows 2,400 dust, or 2,900 dust is the price of this deck. It's actually much cheaper. It's actually including Cthun in there, which is 1,600 of that. So it's a fairly cheap control deck. Most of the time when you compare, aggro decks, mid-range decks, and control decks normally always come out on top in regards to being the most expensive. But in this particular case, these decks are still pretty cheap. They hover around, I think, the 2,000-ish dust range, maybe 1,500 to 2,000. So with this particular deck, Cthun, he normally... For those of you who don't know Cthun, you play Cthun buffers. There's cards that say, give the Cthun in your deck +2/+2. He starts off as a 6/6. You basically make your Cthun a very powerful card. By the end of the game, your Cthun is normally anywhere between, 15/15 and 20/20. You play Cthun, and he does a large quantity of damage to your opponent while being a large minion in himself. If they happen to kill him, you have cards like Doomcaller in your deck to actually bring him back, reshuffle a Cthun in your deck, and give him +2/+2 as well, while Doomcaller is also a big minion. So in this particular build, you're looking to control your opponent in the early game with, removal, cheap cards, Blood Razor, Ravaging Ghoul, maybe some clear with a Disciple of Cthulhu's and Executes. From there, it's a very, I wouldn't say very heavily cycling deck, but we do have double Battle Rage, double Alkalite of Pain, double Shield Block. We have a lot of draw in the deck, so we can be able to draw our Cthulhu buffers from there. Of course, play them and then hopefully draw into and or play Cthulhu relatively early. So if it does end up dying, we can Doomcaller. I would have to say the biggest kind of flaw in this deck is, again, with control decks, most of the time they're really expensive. So we're missing out on cards like Sleep with the Fishes, Brawl, and things of that nature. So I've actually had to replace those with Arcanite Reaper, which is, again, not a bad card. It's going to be able to clear you off some pretty good minions. But unfortunately, again, it's probably not the best card for its slot in this particular deck, but we have to make do as this is a budget-based deck. But as you acquire more warrior cards, you'll definitely be able to kind of tech out this deck and make it a lot more powerful over time. But this is a great starter build for any player, getting into Hearthstone and wanting to build like an Old Gods Cthulhu deck, especially like a control warrior style. So moving over to the Jade/Token Druid, we have this particular build here. Again, it is missing Aya Blackpaw, which is a really, really powerful card in Jade. If you happen to be interested in playing any form of Jade deck whatsoever, Aya is a great first legendary to grab. On top of that, Ultimate Infestation is an awesome Druid card. Again, we can't really put that in there because it is an epic, but we've replaced those cards with what I think are pretty reasonable replacements. We have cards like Gadgetzan Auctioneer and Innervate. So basically, the reason Gadgetzan has left the Druid decks, which for those of you beginner players, you may not know this, but Gadgetzan Auctioneer is basically the draw of this particular deck, and it says every time you cast a spell, you get to draw a card. Cards like Innervate, it's a 0 mana spell, so you play it. It doesn't cost you anything, and it actually gives you 1 mana crystal. It used to give you 2, which was a little broken, but now it only gives you 1. So a lot of the times, you're wanting to play your Gadgetzan Auctioneer to draw at least, 2, 3, 4, even sometimes 5 cards in one turn. With that, you're able to play a sizable amount of Jades, or you just need to draw a couple cards so you can actually get some value going. We also play cards like Lotus Agent, because Lotus Agent can actually generate you more Jade mechanics or healing or whatever you're looking for. So depending on who you're playing and what you're looking for, Lotus Agents can actually save your ass and give you cards that you don't have in the deck that are maybe legendary and or epic. So, you know, being able to discover those kinds of things is really nice if you actually don't have them in your deck. Plus, he's just a rare. We've also teched in double mind control tech, which is really good against aggro decks. Granted, if your opponent has 4 or more minions on the board, mind control tech says you get to take one of those. And we also have in 2 Keeper of the Groves, which is kind of a spicy tech. It allows you to either silence a minion and or deal 2 damage to it, which is pretty unique, and it catches a lot of people off guard. Another interesting thing in this deck is that we run 2 Mark of the Lotus. The reason we do that is because we have a relatively large amount of cheap minions, whether we're, you know, we play Jade Idols, we follows it up with like, you know, a Jade Blossom, we have like a Jade Spirit, you know, we have a bunch of 2/3s, 2/2s on the board. Being able to go ahead and Mark of the Lotus actually makes your board a lot better. Surprisingly, just 1+1 will make minions be able to make trades they normally couldn't make. On top of that, you run double Spreading Plague. So sometimes you'll be able to Spreading Plague, you know, anywhere between 3 to 5 minions, so you actually get 3 to 5 1/5s with taunts, and then from there you actually can buff them all with the Mark of the Lotus. So this deck is actually pretty good, probably one of the best of our controls decks that we have listed here, just because the power of Jades is really strong. But another really good deck in my opinion. They're all going to be pretty good, but this is definitely, I think, one of the stronger ones, and it's actually really powerful in the meta right now, as long as Jades will be around. Jades are actually rotating out in roughly 6 months. I mean, 6 months, but it's still going to be a powerful deck from there. Another Druid deck is going to be the Cthun Druid. Again, because Cthun is a free legendary, as a budget player, you need to take advantage of that. They gave you a legendary and all the tools to be able to make that legendary useful. So with that, you know, it really helped budget-based players be able to build, you know, pretty competitive decks like the one we see here. It costs 3,100 dust. Keep in mind, 1,600 of that is for Cthun, but you get them for free. So don't be overwhelmed by the 3,000 dust. It's really only roughly, you know, 1,600 for this deck. In this particular one, very similar to the Warrior, you spend a lot of your early game and middle game playing cards like Beckoner of Evil, Disciple of Cthun, and Cthulhu's chosen. These cards sacrifice, you know, a little bit better stats for being able to buff your Cthulhu. You make your Cthulhu again 15-15, 20-20, somewhere in there. You play Cthulhu, does sizable amount of damage, and you kill your opponent. If they kill your Cthulhu, again, what do we see here? We see Doomcaller to be able to bring him back, shuffle him in your deck. Keep in mind, though, you cannot Doomcaller if your opponent, like, let's say your Cthulhu doesn't actually die. Let's say they hex it or they polymorph it. It actually turns it into something else and then it dies. That doesn't actually count as Cthulhu dying. So just keep in mind that they actually physically have to kill the Cthulhu, whether they used, you know, Pyroblast, Fireballs, trade minions into it, you know, Deadly Shot, Meteor, stuff like that. But very similar to the Control Warrior in regards of kind of just buffing the Cthulhu, playing minions, depending on Cthulhu and Doomcaller in your late game, and stalling until that point in time. Again, fairly good deck in my opinion. We actually made a deck guide on a Cthulhu Druid not too long ago, so if you're interested in seeing like a tier 1, not tier 1, but like a basically all of the best cards you could fit in this deck, check our deck guide section, and I actually did that again like a few weeks ago. Moving to the next one is, again, going to be a form of Jade, but we actually mixed in some elementals here because I figured going full out Jade really wasn't that cool. Plus, the Jade Spirit being an elemental and Tar Creeper being extremely good for the 3-mana slot. I think this deck is very powerful at the moment and can actually do quite well. Also, you got cards like Volcano, which are only rare, so which is why we were able to include it in this particular list. So not only does this deck have a pretty strong early game with cards like Firefly, Jade Claws, Tar Creeper, and the Jade package, you actually have a fantastic mid game with cards like Master of Evolution, Lotus Agent, Servant of Kalamos. Good thing about Servant of Kalamos is a lot of the cards in the deck are elementals. You can get yourself the legendary Shaman elemental card. I can't think of his name at the top of my head, but he's really good. Kalamos, the Primal Lord. Boom, came coming to you live. Only the highest quality content here at the Shack. Servant of Kalamos can generate you, again, that awesome legendary card, which is the reason why we play him, or more Servant of Kalamos is for value. We've got cards like Volcano and Lightning Storm for the ability to AoE the board and clear it down if you're getting rushed. And then, of course, the Jade package with cards like Jade Chieftain, Jade Spirit, Jade Lightning, and stuff like that. So overall, pretty good deck. And it's, again, it runs 1 Bloodlust. 2 seems to be a little bit too much. 1 is just enough because a lot of the times this isn't an aggro deck, so you're not swarming the board by turn 4 or 5. And if you are, you get lucky Bloodlust, you can cheese your opponent. But a lot of the times this deck really doesn't have a lot of burst, and the Bloodlust gives you the ability to kind of have that burst. And a lot of the times your opponent looks at like a Jade Shaman or like an Elemental Shaman, and most of them don't run Bloodlust, which is exactly why I run 1. It's the exact reason why I run 1. So the next deck is going to be another Jade deck. It's going to be the Jade Rogue. This one, it's a little wonky. If you want a very, very spicy deck, you want some off-the-wall shit, you want something interesting, nobody knows what the fuck you're doing, you play yourself some Jade Rogue. There's a ton of different ways to build this deck. This is actually my, like, not this particular build, but Jade Rogue is the most fun Jade kind of deck that you can play, in my opinion. I love playing Jade Rogue. Again, specifically not this exact build, but the essence, the foundation is there. You gain a huge amount of value with cards like your Undercity Huckster, your Mimic Pods. Unfortunately, you do not have the Rogue DK, which actually allows you to generate huge value, being able to copy basically a card every turn. But you do have cards like Hallucination and Lotus Agents to be able to hopefully provide your Jades, or provide you to generate more Jades, depending on who your opponent is and what you're able to discover. But a lot of the times are in the early game, you're able to throw down a lot of your 1-drops, create 1-drops, or kill your opponent with cards like Jade Shuriken and Shadow Blade and Eviscerate. From there, you head into being able to since there's not a lot of raw draw, you have cards like Cult Master, so you trade in your small Jades to minions, draw a bunch of cards. From there, you get a lot of value. You Jades get to somewhere around anywhere between 4/4s and 6/6s. You bone mare, you turn them into giant, 8/8s, 10/10s, and you swing your opponent in the face. And a lot of the times, they can't deal with that. So this deck actually falls under some form of like a tempo/control based deck, depending again on who you're going against. Like say you're going against an aggro deck, you would play this deck more control-y. If you're playing against a control deck, you'd play this deck more aggressive. So it all depends on who you're going against. Again, this is in kind of like, there's a ton of different ways to build this deck in particular to all of the other decks. The other decks are kind of finite in what you can and can't do. They all are trying to do, like, it's a very linear. Like the decks, there's not a lot of change in them. That's just the way they are. This deck, very, very wavy. So if you see something not working, change it. But again, Jade Rogue is definitely a very fun deck. Maybe not the most competitive. This again is probably not the most powerful of the decks we've gone over, but fun, yes, can win you games. Fun has the potential to make your opponent go, what the fuck is this guy playing? I want to play it too. Yes. So with that, hopefully you've enjoyed our top 5 control-based decks. Again, I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, but unfortunately I didn't. The reason I'm not going over mid-range decks, normally I go aggro, mid-range, control, is because mid-range is in a really weird spot right now where it's really not that powerful. Normally, a deck like all of the decks right now fall under, is it a control deck or is it an aggro deck? There's not really a good mid-range deck right now because they're not fast enough to beat aggro and they're a little bit too slow to beat control. So if if you're running any of the DKs, which is a legendary card, which is why they're not included in this video, but if you're running any of the new legendary DKs, that falls under control decks, and if you're not, it's aggro. So you kind of like, you have to be one end of the spectrum or not, and if you're in the middle, you're going to get wrecked by one or the other, if not most of the time, both. So that's why I didn't include that. So hopefully you made it to at least this part of the video, and I answered your question of where are the mid-range decks. And if someone leaves a comment and you've watched this far, please answer them, because I know I'm gonna get the question because I was a retard and didn't answer this question at the start of the video. So with that, thanks for watching, and I will catch you when the next meta comes out and the next cards come out, so I can make you some more budget decks. Again, thanks for watching. I'm Rob, of course, and happy whatever the hell day it is.